Do you have an audiobook?
I'm sure every author has heard this from time to time, and once you've published one or more of your works, you might start thinking about whether you should provide an audiobook to your fans. Audiobooks are a tempting proposition. It's a fast-growing segment of the publishing industry, and there are a number of outlets that provide audiobook services. Plus, there is a certain level of convenience that audiobooks provide, given that you can listen to them while you do other things. But as an author who has produced 3 successful audiobooks thus far, with a 4th on the horizon, I can tell you there are a number of factors that go into producing and selling audiobooks. And before you take that plunge, there are a few things you should probably know before you start. In my opinion, there are 3 different types of people who utilize or prefer audiobooks. The first group are people who do a lot of traveling. They like a little variety in their commute or journey and will flip on an audiobook just to sort of break up the monotony. The second group are those people who have certain disabilities that prevent them from reading a standard book format. These are people who have conditions like attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, and so on. Oddly enough, I fit into this category of audiobook devotees. The third group, and I'm going to be blatantly sexist here, is men. It's pretty well recognized as a fact that men and women not only have different reading preferences, but also different reading rituals or habits. Women tend to be more gregarious readers, while men are usually pretty tightly focused on their preferences. Women will also set aside time to read, men won't. Men tend to be more activity-focused, whether it's playing video games, changing the oil on their vehicle, or flexing in front of the mirror. What men will do is multitask while engaging in these activities, and that's where the audiobooks come into play. To reinforce this point, I only have to gander at the demographics on my various ad campaigns on Facebook and take a good look on who clicks on what. When I'm selling my paperback or ebook, the people clicking on the purchase tend to be pretty evenly divided between men and women. When I'm selling an audiobook, the respondents are something like 80% male, and it's been pretty consistent across all of my releases. Men, it seems, prefer audiobooks. This doesn't mean that women don't utilize them, because I know I have female audiobook listeners. But as far as preferences go, it's men wanting my audiobooks. Granted, this is just my first-hand experience, though I have heard other authors say the same thing. So, it's something to be aware of before you rush in and invest in audiobook production. The first thing you need to know when it comes to cost is that audiobooks are expensive. Good narrators aren't cheap. Your book should be totally edited and error-free even before you hand the manuscript to the narrator. For most of you, that means hiring an editor. And if you don't hire an editor, well, trust me when I say you'll hear it in the results. Now, if you have a professionally edited manuscript, well, at that point, the audiobook is just an additional cost because the editing that you paid for was a requirement of your printed releases. So all you're doing is essentially paying a narrator and creating a book cover that matches the covers you have for your other formats. Now, if you have an artist who has done your other book covers, this can pretty much be done at a minimal charge. But make no mistake, the cost to hire a narrator, a good narrator, well, they don't come cheap. Can you cut costs? Well, sure, but Be aware many audiobook narrators invest in expensive software and equipment to make their narrations as professional sounding as possible. To this end, the costs can reach into the thousands of dollars, including things like isolation cabinets made to muffle extraneous sound. So if you want it to sound professional, it ain't going to come cheap. And if you try to do it on the cheap, well, like before, you'll hear it in the final audio. To be frank, audiobooks in general are a bit of a risk. Not only can they be expensive to produce, but they are often priced higher than a paperback version of your book. Plus, and this is the kicker, the percentage of royalties you get when a customer buys your audiobook is less than what you'd receive on an ebook. Likewise, the biggest name in audiobooks, and that would be Audible, pays some of the lowest royalties in all the audiobook services out there. Where an ebook could fetch 60 to 70% of an ebook's retail price, Audible pays somewhere in the range of 25 to 45% for the audiobook. While this may have changed in recent months, I'll say I haven't seen any changes in my royalty reports. Oddly enough, I sell more and make more money outside of Audible than in Audible. Ponder that for a moment. So where's the payoff? Simply said, the payoff is reach, especially if you go wide. If your story is more relatable to a male audience, an audiobook is a much easier sell than printed versions. It also puts your story in the hands of people who like to read, but whose schedules prohibit the free time it takes to get through an average book. In my case, audiobook sales were and are the second largest category of books sold or subscribed for both this year and last year. That's a whole marketplace of readers that I wouldn't have had if I had just stuck to paperbacks and ebooks. So a benefit exists, you just have to make sure it applies to your specific situation. Your average audiobook reader, and even the audiobook providers themselves, will expect a certain level of quality from your audiobook. In fact, Audible requires that you run your audiobooks through a quality assurance application to assure they meet some minimum requirements. Then there are the various demands of each audiobook service, namely the amount of silence you need to have between chapters and the file formats and so on. There's more to it, however. Listeners are going to want a narrator who is articulate and whose voice isn't annoying or lulls them into sleep. They're going to want a narration that is entertaining and engaging and isn't full of pop, hiss, or glitches. It should follow the book word for word. That's the minimum. There are some people who make their audiobooks elaborate productions with background music, sound effects, different voice actors for different people, and so on. While this is a tempting proposition, this can quickly get expensive. You have to wrangle schedules or hire a producer to get it all done. You have to secure the rights to use music and sound in most circumstances or pay licensing fees. And in some instances, all this work really doesn't make the audiobook better. It just makes it cost more. Oh, and if your book is poorly written, well, you'll hear that right away as well. In short, producing an audiobook is more than just narrating your book and dropping a bunch of MP3 files in a folder. There's stuff you have to do and quality bars you have to overcome. Audiobooks can be a great addition to your stable of sellable formats. They can help you reach readers who would pass on your story were it available in traditional formats. And if done right, it can really bring your story to life. But these books do not produce themselves, nor do they come at a minimal cost. So consider these factors before you decide to take the plunge. And I would like to remind you that all of my books are available in the audiobook format. I intend to do at least one more video on audiobooks, so keep a sharp eye out for part 2 of this video series, and I'll see you in the funny pages or something like that.